Hello and welcome to the Six Cells podcast. My name's Mike Nicholson from Six Cells. Today I'm going to be speaking to Phil Jackson from Haleon. Phil, how are you?
I'm really great. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for being here. You found it nice and early. Nice sunny day in September. We're recording this, so can't grumble.
No, can't complain at all. Beautiful day in London today.
Indeed. So thanks again. Thanks very much for coming in. So I saw you on stage at Mad Up North, as it was, talking about, I think you were talking about attention that day. But for those that don't know you, could you give us a little bit of a sort of a potted history of your career to date, starting on the sales side, I understand?
Yes. Yeah. So I came out of university having worked a lot in hospitality. I probably worked more than I studied. So for me, university was probably a distraction rather than something that I should have gone into. But when I did come to London, one of the first opportunities that presented itself to me was working at a business-to-business publishing house, selling online advertising on their portfolio of websites, which at the time digital was, everyone knew about digital, but it was still relatively nascent. And I personally didn't have a huge amount of experience in advertising at all. I'd done a marketing degree. I was terrible at it. I was absolutely shocking at it. I would lose sleep at night over not hitting targets, commission.
I think we've all been there on the sales side.
I'm just not a natural born salesperson. Yeah. Like I said, business to business, challenging. It was local government at a time when budgets were tightening. We were I think we were in recession at the time. Therefore, local government is one of the first areas to find efficiencies. Certainly character building, built a lot of resilience. But during that role, I did get to speak to some agencies. Some agencies were representing local government entities in which we were trying to sell advertising space to. And I got a little bit of exposure to what that kind of life in that industry might be. Big media agencies, I think it was MediaCom that I dealt most with. So having had that internal kind of conversation with myself, thinking about, is this really what I want to be doing for an extended period of time? I decided to look into the agency world and managed to find myself a role at Mindshare, working on the Zurich account. So it was a global role in the global team, client leadership focused, and I was entry-level position, working with a fantastic group of people, hugely experienced across trading, client leadership, planning, coordination. And that really got me kind of excited about what digital could be, because I was primarily focused on the digital aspect of what Zurich were doing at the time. Eventually that business was pitched and lost by Mindshare, but I found an opportunity to work on Nestle. And again, that really built my experience of the industry, what it could be. Nestle, very progressive client, doing lots and lots of work. Managed to get myself out to Vevey a few times, working with global clients, working on what they were doing around paid owned and earned media. So to really challenging their markets from a global standpoint, to invest in digital, to drive value from digital marketing. But what I recognized during that time was I was essentially trying to give people guidance and advice on something I'd never done myself. I'd not done any digital planning. It felt a bit hypocritical, if you like. So I took the opportunity when there was a natural kind of break in the time that I felt like I'd done everything that I potentially could on that account to move into the local markets. I moved into the UK market with Havas, took on a director role in their middle office team, which was planning and buying and activation, worked on some of their most digitally savvy, highest spending accounts, Nationwide Building Society, Kia Automotive. We would go on to win clients like Electronic Arts and Beats, and that really got my experience built around, okay, what does it mean at the coalface of using digital advertising and marketing to actually drive business outcomes? Because in the global team, you're aware of that. You're aware of that in the local markets, but you're not in it. You're not facing into it. You're not the commercial challenges, the short-term pressures, etc. And then finally, how I find myself here today at Haleon, formerly GSK. GSK at the time were working with a management consultancy to embed a digital transformation program. And that digital transformation program included 3 roles, one in the UK, one in Germany, and one in the US. And that specific responsibility set was about making sure that the agencies that they were working with on the digital advertising side were being held to account. And that was a skill set that the business didn't have internally at the moment. So they looked outside of their current media agency network, which was, again, WPP at the time. And they looked to hire in these roles to be digital analytics specialists with the sole purpose of making sure that digital marketing was being used as efficiently and effectively as possible. Fast forward 6 or so years, I find myself here today, sitting down with you, talking about kind of that career. So very fortunate.
Yeah, indeed. You've got quite a long title, but should we just call it marketing effectiveness lead? Like it's about 8 or 9 words, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll be careful not to overstate what I'm doing. So the company's gone through a lot of change. GSK separating in the consumer healthcare division into Haleon. For those that don't know Haleon, we manufacture the products that a lot of people will find in their bathrooms and in their cupboards at home.
Aquafresh.
Panadol, Aquafresh, Sensodyne, Centrum, large consumer healthcare brands. So when GSK separated Haleon into a standalone consumer healthcare company, as you can imagine, lots of change, lots of moving parts, titles. My title seems to have just extended over time rather than gotten more succinct. So there's innovation in there, there's effectiveness, there's digital marketing, there's lots of things. But when you break it down to what it is on a day-to-day basis, it's quite simple actually. My job and the job of Rachel, who works with me in my team, is to help our marketing community hold their digital marketing investments to account, both on an efficiency basis and also an effectiveness basis, short and long term. So it's quite a broad church within that, and we sit as part of a marketing effectiveness team, which also sits alongside a business intelligence team as well. But we're very much focused on the digital marketing aspects, which is a significant amount of money in today's world in a company the size of Haleon.
Yeah. So could you define for us then what you mean by marketing effectiveness and what you mean by marketing efficiency? Because I think people maybe have different ideas on what that means depending on who you're speaking to.
Yeah, I'm probably going to plagiarise the WFA, really. I think they've done some of the best work on creating a consistency around what that actually is. So for me personally and the organisation, as we try to articulate it, which is challenging in a large company with lots of people and lots of different voices, it's the people, it's the tools, it's the data, it's the processes, it's the capability that exists within an organisation to ensure that marketing is held accountable and is quantifiable to what contribution it's making to your business outcomes. And those business outcomes could be short-term, long-term, etc. I wouldn't say that efficiency isn't part of that equation, because you want to be as effective as you can, as efficiently as you can. You don't want to be paying more than you should to create incremental gains in brand awareness or brand consideration or incremental revenue. You don't want to overpay for that. So there is an efficiency element to that as well. And I think that's the juggling act of marketing effectiveness, is not just the tools and the data, but it's the processes, it's the bringing people up to speed, it's them helping them on their journey to get better outcomes through the use of marketing. And so I think that's the underpinning element, is making sure that it's not just data tools, it's people and process and capability and upskilling and hand-holding where hand-holding needs to be. That's how we try to operate as a team, whether it's myself in the digital space or whether it's colleagues working on marketing mix modeling or it's colleagues working on pricing or brand equity tracking. We do a lot of engagement with stakeholders, capability training, train the trainer aspects and things. That is a huge part of what marketing effectiveness currently is for in our business, making sure people have the tools, but also the feeling that they can use them independently.
Okay. So I was putting together some target audiences for a client recently and looking at FMCG brands, just let's say for argument's sake, but I was looking at lots of different categories and it looks like marketing effectiveness, at least in a named sense, isn't inside every business. So is there something about a brand that makes it decide that it needs somebody in your role? Or is it a role that maybe gets spread out across lots of other people in other roles, just doesn't get named? Or yeah, I'm just curious why one brand would decide to have a head of marketing effectiveness to shorten your title just to make it easier, and why others wouldn't. Well,
I'll give a big shout out to my line manager Camille there, who is officially our global head of marketing effectiveness and business intelligence. I'm one part of her team, and we have organically come together. I think it's fair to say we were in different. You could say, for example, that my role is misplaced in. Take a step back. We exist in the global marketing team. Within the global marketing team, there's a marketing services function and there's a consumer insights and analytics function. We're in that insights and analytics function. I spend a lot of my time talking with the media team and the brand managers, etc. So you could say I should be in that team, but I do feel it helps to have all of the components together. So for that's happened for us organically. We weren't always in the same team. We've been brought together, and then it's been defined and curated internally from a narrative and a communication perspective as marketing effectiveness and other elements as well. And that's what's really interesting when you then go down to a local level. You see, okay, maybe this market or this region doesn't have a marketing effectiveness person per title, but when you cut through the noise and look at the responsibilities and what people are actually doing on a day-to-day basis, like, well, we would consider you, if we were looking to start a conversation with, let's say, the Philippines, we would consider this individual to be our advocate and our champion for marketing effectiveness because of what they do and how they act and how they lean into the accountability for quantifying marketing, driving marketing forward, optimizing marketing. So I think that's a challenge at the moment, certainly for, I think, the sales side is, I'd like to speak to the marketing effectiveness person. Well, that person may not exist in title, but I guarantee you in most organizations now there will be someone, whether it's personal accountability or whether it's defined by their organization, trying to take that on and drive it themselves. And the one thing that I've seen, which is quite interesting in the market at the minute, is almost market mix modeling teams becoming synonymous with marketing effectiveness. And that's really interesting because marketing effectiveness isn't just MMM. It's more than that. MMM, if done correctly, will give you a very clear and a robust view of how the marketing levers are working to contribute to sales impact. But what about brand equity? Is pricing in there? What about creative and the contribution of creative as well? So I think that's a risk. If you just say, we've got a marketing effectiveness team, or what does that marketing effectiveness team? Well, they do MMM. So, okay, well, what about everything else that goes into that? And they may say, no, we've got it covered within the MMM team. I think that's the interesting dynamic at the minute, in that it's quite organic and flexible, depending on which team you're talking to or brand you're talking to, in which country you're talking to. There's certainly no standardization, whether it's the definition of what marketing effectiveness means or the people that are trying to drive it internally, which is why it's actually quite an interesting space to be in, because it's not uniformity. It's not, we have a media team who does biddable, we have a media team who does social, we have a media person who does search. That just doesn't feel like there's that codification yet that's come down and gone, well, we need these roles, which is also a competitive advantage, I guess, as well for businesses, because if you can get the structure in place, the people in place, the data, the tools, all of those things, then you should be using it to drive a competitive advantage, because if you have this people and it's operating as it should, you know how your marketing is working, you should be finding out how to make it better, and you should be growing incrementally, profitably as a result of having that team in place.
So it's a bigger role than I'd given it credit for, I guess. I when I look at that title and I look at the brand, I'd kind of assumed incorrectly that most of your time would be spent looking at the results of a media investment and trying to figure out how effective that was. But you said there's people, processes, training, there's tools, there's a whole range of things in your kind of tool bag, if you like, or in your remit. So I'd love to know how. So you're within the marketing function, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So how do you sit within the marketing function, and how do you interact with like the head of biddable, the head of social, the CMO, all of the other people that are sort of operating within that marketing function? How do you kind of on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis kind of interact with those people?
Well, this is definitely one of the things that I think it is important to recognise when you're looking at who does these roles, in like their ability to have a really strong and broad network of people, and understand who those stakeholders are, what their objectives are, what their kind of motivations are, and kind of what gets them up in, keeps them up in the night, basically. And that could be very different from a brand manager working on Sensodyne in France.
B2B sites, for example.
Well, B2B sites, yeah, like very, very PTSD. I've just put it aside, and I don't think I can.
Are you kind to salespeople as a result?
I absolutely recognise how challenging that is, and I think it's an under-recognised ability to communicate with stakeholders, whether it's agencies or brands, and just empathise with, okay, what is your challenge and what can we do to help with that? And I don't see myself as particularly different. So maybe I'd be a better salesperson now than I was back then, because over the years it's taken that experience and kind of resilience to go, okay, well, today I need to have a conversation with a brand manager who's looking after Sensodyne in France, and what their day looks like and what their priorities are is very different from the global insights lead for Voltaren. it's a very different conversation. How do you flex yourself to make sure you're understanding, okay, what is it that I have that's valuable to these individuals, and what is it that I can bring that's going to solve a problem for them? So I think that's definitely an underappreciated element of marketing effectiveness. It isn't a simple program you can just roll out. In my opinion anyway, people may disagree in different businesses. It isn't a simple program you roll out and you just say to everyone, here it is, adopt, and things will improve. So much of the time we spend, myself and my colleagues, in marketing mix modeling, creative effectiveness, pricing, all of these different elements that exist within this wider team, were problem solving. Okay, what is the challenge you have? It could be...
So would that person call you in and say, right, we've got a problem, can you come to a meeting, we're going to talk about this problem, and then you'll be there to kind of help them with that?
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
that would be amazing. They put up the bat signal or something, and we come. Again, this comes back to the network. It's like, okay, do people know what you bring to the table? What's your value? This is a conversation that could be marketing effectiveness. It could be anything really. What's the value you bring to the table? And creating that almost internal brand about what you can do, and you've demonstrated it through different things. People ideally would come to you and say, look, I've got this challenge, can you help? And you have to be transparent and say, well, yes, I can. I would leverage kind of this opportunity that already exists, or we can create something new together, and then you'd have a conversation about money and funding and resource and time and everything, because again, you've got to prioritize. But also there's a high degree of proactivity as well. Again, not too dissimilar from a sell side role, where you're going, okay, well, let me just look at the landscape in the organisation, and this is where you need to be very aware of the ecosystem you're operating in. Whether it's the economic pressures in the US at the minute, or whether it's competition coming from a new entrant into a market, or what do I then think the challenges that they're going to be facing is, and then start a conversation around that, or to say, okay, we can see at the minute that social media has a very, very broad ROI across different sets of markets. Why is that? Why are some markets really struggling to generate ROI and effectiveness on social media, and why are others really being successful? And how do I go and have a conversation with those that potentially are at the worst end of the spectrum, and investigate why that is? Is that a challenge already on your radar? Is it something I'm bringing new to your perspective? And that's why one of the parts of the role is we curate a global media learning agenda every year. So we take inspiration from the global media team and what their priorities are and what their focus areas are, attention being one of those examples, and then we build a standardized learning agenda around that. Say, okay, well, what's the question we're trying to answer? And I've spoken about attention till the cows come home, basically, and you've seen me talking about attention at MadFest and various other things. But very simply for us, that was, okay, if we use attention data or media quality data, as we're maybe more stepping into now, does that enable us to drive an incremental business performance as a result of utilising that data? And if so, how do you most cost efficiently use that data to achieve those outcomes? So that's the North Star that you would hope everyone in the organisation who's exposing themselves to attention data is using. And then within that might be, okay, what does that look like in YouTube? What does that look like in open web? What does that look like in Meta? And then you can share that out and say, okay, here's an invitation to participate with these questions and these opportunities, and here's some standardized resources that we're providing. They might be test designs, they might be some central funding, they might be access to some training. So that's where you can't just sit back and expect the business to come and ask you all the questions.
You learn it, and then you proactively go out and offer that to the marketing organisation.
It's got to be both. It's got to be proactive, and but you've also got to have some bandwidth, ideally, for the inbound reception of, I have a challenge, how can you help me address it? I don't believe, and I think this comes back to who your stakeholders are and the bandwidth they have. Because I do think in the world of marketing now, we've become quite repetitive, like we just repeat processes. And I think that's one of the big things about marketing effectiveness, to come back to what the definition is. Do people have space to build a testing plan, to reconcile the results of a campaign once they've ended? Do they have the space to kind of revisit what has just happened? Or is it too condensed to say, okay, well, I've got to move on to the next thing now? So that's a cultural element. I think that there's a responsibility from the very highest leadership in any organisation where marketing effectiveness is, how much space are you building in your day, week, month, quarter to stop, think, process what you've learned, and then are you reapplying? Are you not reapplying? Have you had a conversation with your agency or your media partners or whatever about that? I think that's a big component of what marketing effectiveness means, is just space to process, assess, and learn.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever looked at some data, taken that step back to look at a new process, looked at some data and found out something that you absolutely didn't think would be the case? Like, it's basically, because we all have kind of assumptions on what we think probably would work or what would be true after a track record of working in marketing for so long. But have you ever conducted a piece of research or training or something? I thought, actually, that's completely different to the results that I was expecting.
Occasionally, I think is that reconciliation of what was my hypothesis, like how broad was my hypothesis. Like, a lot of using the attention data at the minute, we kind of know, and hopefully everyone's starting to recognise now, that different platforms garner different levels of consumer attention. So when we've been auditing ourselves across 47 markets, 7 platforms, there haven't been a huge amount of surprises. I think when you start to connect those data points into outcomes, that's when maybe the surprises start to come. What is the, if I just use Adelaide as the example, who we're working with at the moment, if you say what is the incremental dollar or pound of revenue per attention unit, per whatever AU, I think there's some surprising insights there around what you might get on Meta versus YouTube versus TikTok. The core underlying how many attention units are you going to get on this platform typically is not surprising, but the relationship between how those attention units convert into outcomes has been interesting and surprising on some occasions. I mean, the biggest light bulb recently was we've been working with Amazon and Ecometrics to conduct deep dives into the Amazon performance, so isolating the Amazon performance from the rest of the variables in the econometric modelling, going deep into reach and frequency, into placement, format, combinations of tactics, etc., things like that, and the level to which sponsored products, so just the search product on Amazon drives offline sales, really took me by surprise. And I'm not in the data every day, so I'm not sitting there hands on keyboard running the Amazon campaigns, whether DSP or search. But the volume of offline sales that were being driven as a result of us investing in sponsored products, I found hard to kind of
So seeing
realize.
it on Amazon, but then going and buying it somewhere else.
Exactly, yeah. Whether that be in the UK, whether that be Boots, or whether that's Carrefour in France or what have you. So that was really surprising, and it helps illuminate the conversation around effectiveness, because you've moved from Amazon being attributable only to Amazon sales to Amazon being attributable for sales in supermarkets, in pharmacies, etc. And I think that's one of the great benefits of marketing mix modelling. But as I said earlier, if you only use marketing mix modelling to measure your marketing effectiveness, what is the impact of that Amazon advertising on your equity? Certainly for a lot of our brands, we're very fortunate that have very high awareness. They have very high consideration. If you go into the supermarket in the UK, your choice, Colgate, Sensodyne, Oral-B, it's a relatively small consideration set. Obviously, there's more new entrants coming into the market, own brand, own labels, etc., like that. But most of the time, we're fortunate that our brands are positively measured when it comes to brand awareness. But if you're launching something new, like we have a new whitening product for Sensodyne that's now a couple of years old, and what's the consideration around that? What's the brand awareness of that? Are people associating it with the Sensodyne brand? That's another part of what's really important, because we're operating in a world where we don't want to lose sight of the long term, but also want to be monitoring the short term as well. I think that's where it's really interesting in making sure you have the full picture, and why our teams hopefully work so closely together. And my responsibility to represent, what are the digital marketing investments doing for our business, is to tap in to the long-term measurement, the short-term measurement, the very tactical measurement, the brand level measurement, and knowing what's important, which is, where it comes back to, what are the top-down things that we're pushing into market? Say, we think of the big bets: attention, sustainability, measurement, media quality. What are the big bets that we're pushing down? But then also listening to say, actually, in LATAM at the minute, quick commerce is exploding. And that may not be the same trend and trajectory in other markets, but how do we then learn from what is happening in LATAM on quick commerce, it's Rappi or other platforms like that, and then take those learnings potentially into other markets or help them to be ready when the trend explodes. Another great example at the minute is the weight loss medications for weight loss, Manjaro and other drugs like that. They're exploding in certain markets at the minute. Huge kind of penetration of those medications in some markets. What side effects they have? What is the potential of our portfolio to support those consumers? Taking those learnings from where they're doing it first, and then having that repository ready for when other markets follow. And so that's another key role that we have with this learning agenda and this program, is to make sure we're categorizing the learnings, aggregating them together, making them available, socializing them, because if they just sit in a filing cabinet collecting dust, then there's no real value to anyone beyond maybe the people that ran the case study.
It's really interesting what you said about Amazon, and it kind of sparked off a conversation I had with, I think it was Nick Ashley from Tesco on the podcast. You were talking about placing sponsored ads on Amazon, but actually getting sales off Amazon. And Nick Ashley was making the argument that in-aisle advertising within a supermarket, so let's say Aquafresh 2 for 1, would be judged on how many tubes of toothpaste. I was trying to think what a unit of toothpaste was there for a minute. Completely when I meant a tube of toothpaste. It sold, but he made the argument that it was actually really good branding as well, because it's in a contextual environment area, and it's going to get your attention because of that. And even if you don't buy Aquafresh that day, there may be an awareness or a consideration for future that's like perhaps a metric that's not being measured because it's not what it's there for. So that's quite interesting, do you think?
Yeah, I think part of the culture of marketing effectiveness is making sure that when you're activating anything, or owned media, paid media, websites, putting something new on a website, what is the aim of doing that, and how do you measure it? Sometimes it's not particularly easy, especially for large FMCG businesses where the majority of their sales are happening in bricks and mortar, ourselves included. How do you attribute in-store advertising, website, social media, etc., which is why you need a toolbox, and that's one of the other things that we try to do for our marketeers. Is we've created I'm reluctant to say a playbook. It's not a playbook. It's a catalogue of tools and methodologies that we believe are best in class, and then almost creating a guide as to how you would use those. So, are you trying to understand the contribution of the creative in a campaign or an activation? Are you looking at sales outcomes? Is it more brand outcomes? What is the horizon at which you're measuring? Are you measuring a short-term effect, a medium-term effect, or a long-term effect? What is the definition of short, medium, and long? Who standardized that? Who defines that? So it becomes almost a matrix of sorts. Say, okay, well, I want to understand how this new creative asset performed in the short term to drive sales. And then theoretically, if you're able to construct the right mechanic, you can guide people into a consistent way of going, okay, well, the best way for me to do that is to choose this partner or this methodology. It might be a sales lift study with Sakana, doing a geo experiment by isolating regions and saying, okay, let's run this creative here and nothing in this region, so we should go the incrementality of nothing, and then run the two creative assets in the two different regions and measure the incrementality. I really empathise with the modern brand manager. There's a lot coming at them. There's a lot of expectation around all the levers that can be used. And I think the responsibility of working marketing effectiveness is to make it as simple and as frictionless as possible to access what needs to be accessed when it needs to be accessed. Because I genuinely believe that if you put the day-to-day responsibilities of a brand manager into a pie chart, advertising and marketing will vary by client and brand and situation, but I doubt it'll be the biggest amount of their time. And we sometimes act, and I'm guilty of it, and I'm sure many others are, in wanting to over-index on the time we're asking people to spend looking at marketing effectiveness, measurement, and optimization versus other levers. Exactly to that point, what you were making about Nick and Tesco's. What is going in store? How's my distribution? Am I having challenges? What's the competitors doing? All of those other things, and that's where I think it's really important to understand, almost like interview and know your stakeholders. And says, okay, well, are there certain times of the year that it's best to engage and advocate for what you're saying, maybe at the end, depending on your planning cycle, if it's the end of the year where they're building a learning plan for 2026, when is the best time to interject and add your contribution, rather than expecting in the middle of summer in Italy to have a conversation about, what is the next MMM you've got coming up. It's like, well, you read the room, the Italian market has slowed down almost entirely, and you're not going to get any traction. So with the risk of repeating myself, consistently, it's beyond just the data, the tools and the processes. It's a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of people skills, which I think I'm grateful to have built, coming back to my background, knowing the experience of what it's like on the sales side, working client servicing and leadership roles in agencies, then being on the media planning side and having to work through all the challenges that come, and seeing the client's requests coming in and how quickly a client's request can filter out, like, oh, we have this money and then this money's gone. And it can be happening in the space of a couple of days. You bring all that together to say, okay, I'm a marketing effectiveness practitioner who has to manage their network and their stakeholders to get the most out of the relationship. Okay.
So you've obviously been involved in the whole sort of from planning to buying and everywhere in between. So could you give us an example of how a campaign from its embryonic stage might go through the Haleon marketing team, and at what point you might get involved and how? So what happens before it gets to you, or are you involved right at the beginning, or does it depend on the campaign? Like just to give us kind of, it could be a fictitious or an actual example of how a campaign went from start to finish and how you kind of interacted with that. That'd be great.
Unfortunately, there's only myself and my Rachel, who works in my team, so we don't have a lot of resource to spread across everything. So first and foremost, it's about picking your opportunities. Where's the biggest spend? If we're saying, okay, our biggest opportunity is to improve the incremental revenue contribution of paid media, then naturally you're gravitating towards the likes of the US and other large markets based on media spend. And then again, you're gravitating towards the larger platforms who typically tend to absorb a lot of the budget. So I'd say we're less involved we're almost indirectly involved from planning. We try to stay aware of, what are the new campaigns that are coming out of our global teams, because we run global brands. So we'll be developing global campaigns, which will then be activated in market. So understanding what's coming down the pipeline, to what extent do those campaigns maybe lean more into some of the levers that are in our global learning agenda. So, for example, it could be a specifically a campaign focused on inclusivity, reaching a new audience. In which case, that's where it plays really nicely into what we're trying to do around responsible and inclusive media, where that's working with different media owners, the sustainability of the advertising. So I think we almost attack it passively by people knowing what we do. And then I think when it starts to get into the markets is when people recognize, oh, there's an opportunity here to learn something or to experiment with something, and we would hope to be involved, or through the conversations that we're already having with that market, hopefully we'll be getting exposure to, oh, well, there's something coming up. Senstein, for example, are about to do something in the UK, which is very interesting and very new for them. And because it's going to be heavily involving Google, that's how we kind of almost got brought in to say, okay, well, there's a heavy Google element to this. We know that you have funding available through your global GABP to look at measurement. How can you contribute and consult and support? I think that's almost the BAU of how it happens. But certainly, again, it helps to have that visibility internally in that relationship with the key stakeholders. Because if you want to be right up front, then from the very origination, then it would start with the global category leaders who are developing that campaign, inserting almost learning questions into that. If there needs to be learning questions, maybe there doesn't, but there might be some learning questions about, how do we successfully execute this in retail media? Maybe they haven't used retail media that much before and they're looking to address that. Well, we've already learned these things in retail media, so these are the things you should be factoring in. This is maybe the extra questions you want to be asking. How do you disseminate those to markets? Which markets are best placed to answer what questions? As I've already alluded to, LATAM and APAC have a very different retail media environment to Europe. So how would you address the different questions there? Different consumers. So there's a lot of consultation and conversation that goes into it. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as join the Teams thread or the email thread, and we'll carry you all the way through. And then the biggest barrier to us is ensuring that when the market is actually activating that piece of activity, they've ring-fenced some money, resource budget to measure robustly, because we don't control what a market invests in media, whether it's working media, non-working spend, whether that's our measurement data. We don't control that. So the best we can do is influence why we think it's really important to have an MMM deep dive, or a piece of post-campaign analysis conducted by Kantar or Nicholson, or we think you should be running a sales lift experiment. And that comes back to the fact that they hopefully would have consulted our measurement catalogue, they would have been aware of our global learning agenda, they would have known that we have this partnership with Google. All of those things should hopefully passively get us to a point where we've almost been involved without being involved, because we've influenced the process. And then at the end, hopefully we would end up, the outcome for us hopefully would be a case study, which is robustly written, linked to clear business outcomes that we can then take, aggregate, and process into what we hope would be a global learning. For example, next time Aquafresh does this, they should probably replicate, because it's had great success on Sensodyne or great success on Powered on Tax.
Mm. Awesome. So slightly fun question, hopefully. Lots of tools, lots of frameworks, lots of processes, lots of data. If it all went tomorrow, you had nothing left, you had to start again from tomorrow with nothing, what are the 2 or 3 things that you'd start working on first?
The most boring one you would start with is data foundations. What do you have? How well organized is it? How well accessible is it? Do you have sales data? Do you have equity data? What tracking is in place? How well organized is it? If you're talking specifically about advertising within the marketing mix, how well can you attribute advertising, the causal effect of advertising onto incremental sales above and beyond your baseline sales, your distribution, your pricing, all of those other non-advertising effects. So an audit of that. What do you need? How easy is it going to be to get those things? That's kind of number one. The pretty much every challenge we face into when we're looking to retrofit some analysis or some measurement on something is because the data doesn't stitch together, or we have an absence of something. We don't have this campaign. We can't stitch together how it was labelled in 2 different countries. Simple things like that. Very boring, very necessary to make sure that you have the foundations. I think secondly would be, as I mentioned before, that global, if indeed you have a global structure or there's some global team in place, like some standardization of what marketing effectiveness is going to be, but an acknowledgement that that's going to be adopted and interpreted differently in different countries. So you don't need to have, and you're not going out there and saying you need to have 3 people in your country doing these 3 jobs, or else you're not achieving the expectations around marketing effectiveness. Like, okay, well, how do you design a team? How do you build a structure and a set of capabilities that can enable you to do this? And where's the gap analysis? I think the WFA has something really useful on that as well. They have some templates around, okay, you build like an action plan for, okay, we think the problem is data, or we think the problem is people, or we think the problem is processes. X aren't talking to Y regularly enough, and therefore things are slipping through the cracks. So that common definition, and having someone to advocate for that and kind of be the representative of what that is, and then hopefully everyone subscribes to it in some way, shape or form, and then you have that consistency. And then I think finally, I'd say it is, I'm biased on this. I try and create some kind of learning plan, whether that's local or global. Sit down with your stakeholders that are all involved and go, what's the first thing we've got to fix? What's the biggest issue? Because if you've got each brand trying to fix something different, or you've got your search lead and your social lead trying to fix different things, surely it's easier to try and fix one thing together first and then create a backlog of what those things are and size them. What do we think the opportunity is? Like if you're currently really struggling to drive the sales effect that you think you should be getting on YouTube, and your YouTube is your biggest spend, that's probably your biggest priority just from an advertising perspective. Or if you're losing share dramatically, have you diagnosed why that is? Is that a pricing issue? Is that an equity issue? And then build a consensus around that and try and go after that in a structured way, because I think if you've got 15 people trying to solve 15 different problems and they're probably all trying to ask one person to help them, or they've got one data team or one tech team trying to fix that, I think that's going to be inefficient and essentially slow you down. So it doesn't have to be a learning agenda, it could just be something on the back of a napkin, say, okay, well, these are the things that we think are holding us back, top 3 things, top 5 things, and then have someone orchestrating everyone's contribution to that, and just work in a consistent way that way, rather than, as I say, the alternative can be problematic.
Cool. Okay. And final question. Obviously, you've already got your dream job, but if the worst happened and you had to leave Haleon, what would be your dream job?
I'm a massive Arsenal fan, but I also really, really love tennis. And I love travelling. So what my dream job would be, if it's possible, and I'm apologising in advance if there's anyone from the marketing team at the ATP or WTA watching this now, thinking I'm coming after them. I'd love to work in tennis somehow, marketing ATP, WTA, to work in and around and travel around the tennis tour, Australia, London, Paris, New York, obviously for the Grand Slams, and then the rest of the tour kind of goes throughout the year. I mean, that would be amazing. I guess similar jobs probably exist in Formula One and maybe for FIFA and stuff, but something in marketing for tennis with the ability to travel, ideally bring my family along as well, and we kind of just see the world whilst also doing marketing. That'd be absolutely amazing, because I think having a passion for that and really putting myself into that around kind of tennis and growing the game and seeing more young people come into that would be an amazing opportunity to work in kind of that marketing and see that kind of fruition.
Absolutely. So not available, but maybe one day, who knows? Yeah, maybe.
Works two ways. If the job exists, and
do I get some sort of commission if you end up getting that job as a direct result of this?
I hope so. I hope that would be what would come about.
Phil, thank you so much. Really, really interesting to talk to you today, and thanks for being on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.